What is happening with a 16-inch MacBook Pro? We've seen so many leaks, so many rumors, and even actual proof found in beta versions of macOS that clearly show that Apple is clearly working on the brand new generation of the MacBook Pros. And we were expecting to see a brand new MacBook Pro by the end of October, but that hasn't happened. So here's an update on everything we know so far and what is really the status of this new 16-inch MacBook Pro. So here's the latest updates, everything that's happening with this. So grab some snacks and let's have a look. To keep your Mac running fast and secure, check out Intego's Premium Bundle X9 that includes a number of very useful tools for your Mac. Use the link below to get a 60% discount. Okay, so we're currently in November now, which means that Apple hasn't had any event in October this year like most of us were expecting, or at least hoping. You see, Apple has two big events every single year. We have WWDC in June, then this is where Apple announces the new versions of iOS, macOS, and tvOS, so that's a software-focused event, and then in September, this is the big hardware-focused event, where Apple introduces the brand new iPhones every year, the brand new Apple Watch, and sometimes a few more extra things as well. However, the Macs and the iPads never really had a place in any event. WWDC was always too full with software releases, and then the September event was always too full with iPhone releases. So because of that, Apple sometimes has two more events in the year. So a March event where they release a new entry-level iPad or iPads, and then an October event at which they release new Macs and new iPad Pros. However, when it comes to the Mac events, it's a bit more complicated as Apple needs to wait for Intel to release new processors before they can actually update their own machines. If we take a look at the list of when Apple events have happened in the past few years, you can see that they've pretty much had 3 or 4 events every year since 2010, aside from 2017 when, interesting enough, they've only had 2. Now, the MacBook Pro and the Air are by far the most popular Macs that Apple has ever made. So this is why there's so much hype whenever a new generation comes out, because you see, unlike the iPhones which get updated every 2 to 3 years now, Macs don't really get updated that often design-wise. The current generation of MacBook Pros came out in 2016, while the previous generation came out in 2012, and the one before that came out in 2008. So it seems like every 4 years, Apple releases a brand new design. So a new design to this generation isn't really expected until 2020, but as you probably all know, Ming-Chi Kuo, Bloomberg, DigiTimes Taiwan, and pretty much all the very well-known sources have said that Apple will be releasing a new 16-inch MacBook Pro in 2019, which was supposed to be launching by the end of October. But all of this was quite weird. Like, why would Apple release a new generation of MacBook Pros a year earlier than usual, and why didn't they have an event or any event to announce it? Well, considering the number of issues that this generation has had, ranging from severe keyboard issues, thermal throttling issues, creaking noise issues, faulty speaker issues, like my speakers have died twice on the 2016 model, and so much more, this generation has been a total disaster. I even made multiple videos with my own issues with this generation of MacBook Pros and how Apple's customer support is just straight up garbage when it comes to dealing with expensive devices such as this one. This was a $5,000 MacBook Pro, which is broken, and have a look at this video, Apple still hasn't fixed it. So full video on this here. Yeah, this generation is horrible and it needs to be replaced as soon as possible. Apple tried fixing this keyboard with every new model that they've launched since 2016, with small improvements in the keycap mechanism, but they just couldn't, because you see, the butterfly key switch mechanism, that was faulty from the very start. It's not a great design, and the keys are just too shallow, and for example, my left shift key is now broken. So this new generation is set to come with a brand new mechanism, the scissors mechanism, funny enough, the one that the previous generation of MacBook Pros before the 2016 models had. This will give us more key travel than before, since at the moment you can barely even feel the keys moving. So a fixed keyboard would be the first change. We'll also be getting a larger display between a 16 to a 16.4 inch panel from the 15.4 inch one that we had with this model. And we're also getting slimmer bezels, slightly. The body will also be getting thicker in order to improve the cooling, but yeah, that's mostly it in terms of the main changes. So yeah, that doesn't seem like a lot. We've actually made a concept in which we increase the size of the touch bar to make it more usable and extend it until the very top of the frame, because before, this area was unused and it just didn't look good at all, having that massive empty space there, especially on the 15-inch model. However, it seems like the changes would be even smaller than we expected. French website Mac Generation found an icon of the 16-inch MacBook Pro in the latest macOS Catalina 10.15.1 beta. And this is how it looks like. Yes, that's the 16-inch, even the file name says 16-inch in silver and space gray, but it's pretty much identical to the current model. So there you go, this is as official as it gets until the unveil. And yes, unfortunately, unless you put them side by side, you cannot really tell any difference between the 15-inch model. And then putting them side by side, you can see that the entire machine is indeed larger and the bezels are just slightly thinner, but the differences are so small that I just cannot call this a new generation of MacBook Pros. Even though the bezels are thinner, they're still thicker than on something like a Dell XPS 13-inch 2-in-1 or many of the other more modern laptops released in 2019. We still have that big chin with the MacBook Pro branding on the bottom, which I don't really like. Like, it's way too fat and it takes up so much space that's quite unnecessary. Like, I always prefer the previous look of the 2012 Retina MacBook Pros that had no branding at all on the display. And looking at the two icons of both, the bottom chin looks to be exactly the same thickness as before, so yeah, I'm extremely disappointed. Now, there are a few other changes that we do get aside from the slightly thinner bezels and the larger display. So, for example, if you zoom into the top left section of the touch bar on the 16-inch MacBook Pro icon, you can see that there seems to be a bit of a space in between the touch bar and a button on the left. Now, we've even had a second image that was discovered by developer Guilherme Rambo in macOS 10.15.1 beta again, and this one actually shows the full official image of the right-hand side of the new 16-inch MacBook Pro. And there's probably one thing that you've noticed right away, and that is how the Touch ID sensor is actually separated now from the touch bar, which means that the button on the left is most likely the escape key, which will also now be separated from the touch bar as well. That was the main complaint, or one of the main complaints that developers had, and I had it as well, since the escape key is a key that I hit a lot in a lot of programs, and not having a physical key for that can be extremely frustrating. And thanks to this image, we can also see the keyboard, but to me at least, it looks identical to the current generation, with no more key travel than what we have now, so that's pretty disappointing as well. Keep in mind that if this is a new generation indeed, then this is what we'll get for the next 3 to 4 years, which means a total of 6 to 8 years with what's mostly the same design and what looks to be the exact same keyboard. The touch bar is looking to be about the same size as before, maybe even a bit shorter because of the introduction of the escape key. So I don't know, especially now when we have laptops such as the Asus ZenBook Duo that actually have 2 displays that are fully usable. Video on that very soon, by the way, so definitely stay tuned for that. Or laptops that are 2-in-1 laptops with, a touchscreen, you can fold them in any way you want, with pen input, and some of them even with a crazy 22-hour battery life, and crazy specs and features like that. It just makes the MacBook Pro feel extremely old and already outdated, even before it's even out. Unless, of course, this is not a new generation of MacBook Pros and instead an addition to the current lineup, so something similar to what Apple has done with the iMac Pro that still uses the same old design. And that's because you see, every new generation of MacBook Pros have had some massive changes in pretty much every single way. Like the 2012 Retina MacBook Pro, that was by far the biggest change ever in a MacBook Pro or even in a laptop. So that one had a high-resolution Retina display, something never before seen in a laptop. It also had full flash storage from the hard drive that we had before. It had a design that was pretty much half the thickness of the previous model. It was much lighter, so it was years ahead of the previous generation. The 2016 generation that we have now, this one was a much smaller upgrade because you see, aside from the DCI-P3 panel, slightly thinner bezels, the space gray color, the downgraded keyboard, and the Touch ID and the touch bar, we didn't really get much else. Mostly because we've reached to a point where laptops have become as good as they can be, and the only things that we can improve on laptops are the specs. Unless, of course, we have dual displays or crazy concepts such as that one, which Apple doesn't usually do first. MacRumors posted a GIF of the current 15-inch MacBook Pro and the new 16-inch leaked MacBook Pro photo. And like I said, they're pretty much identical. So the touch bar appears to be maybe a bit taller, barely even noticeable to be honest, and luckily the top portion of the case is now just a bit slimmer. The keys do seem to have more space in between than on the current 15-inch model, which is always a welcome change. So judging by all of these official images that were found in macOS 10.15.1 beta, the release of this new 16-inch MacBook Pro seems to be quite imminent. Now, Ming Chi Kuo actually released a report this week updating his research notes on the 16-inch MacBook Pro. And here he said that Apple would only be switching to a scissor switch mechanism keyboard in Q2 or Q3 2020, which means either June or September next year. And he was also the one that initially talked about Apple working on a scissor keyboard switch for the new 16-inch MacBook Pro for this year. So if that gets delayed, then there's a very high chance that this MacBook Pro 16-inch will also get delayed until 2020. Rather than, shipping with the all-style keyboard, which would be another disaster. And Digitimes reported that Apple will begin receiving shipments of this new 16-inch MacBook Pro in Q4 2019, which is October, November, and December. So as you can see, there's a lot of contradictory reports. Some of them say that it will be released this year, some of them say that no, it actually won't until next year. And I do believe that at least what Apple should do is just don't release it, wait until next year because of Intel and AMD. You see, Intel's 10th generation processors, they have indeed launched, but it's only the Y series and the U series, so the 7-watt and the 15-watt processors, which are aimed at the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro 13-inch, not a 15-inch, because the 15-inch one needs the H series, which is the 45-watt processor that the current model uses. And for the H series, we need to wait until next year, around May or June or so, just in time for a truly next generation MacBook. As otherwise, if the 16-inch MacBook Pro gets released before that, well, then we will be getting the exact same processor that we got with the May 2019 release of the 15-inch MacBook Pro this year. So the Intel 9980HK processor, which is really good, but again, that's 9th generation, and why release a new generation of MacBook Pros with the old processor? And same thing goes for the GPU. Aside from the Vega 20 that we got back in November 2018, which is already an outdated architecture, we haven't really had anything new from AMD since, in terms of mobile GPUs that would be a good fit for this new MacBook Pro. Maybe Apple is working alongside AMD on a custom RDNA GPU, similar to what Sony and Microsoft are doing for the PS5 and the Xbox too. But yeah, don't get your hopes too high because the chances of that happening are extremely slim. Now, there are a few more leaks that I want to mention. So we actually did a very detailed video on the 16-inch MacBook Pro back in July 2019. And this is when we barely had any leaks on it. And in that video, I talked about a few interesting things that I found and noticed. For example, how the upcoming Apple Pro Display XDR supports up to 96 watts of power output. However, the current generation 15-inch MacBook Pros, they only support 87 watts. So my theory here was that the new 16-inch MacBook Pro would require either a 94-watt power adapter or a 96-watt power adapter. Why 94? Well, it was also an option because the LG Ultrafine 5K display, the new one, supports up to 94 watts of power output via Thunderbolt 3 rather than 96 watts. And it seems like there's actually been a leaked power adapter, presumably for the 16-inch MacBook Pro, and this one actually shows a 96-watt USB-C power adapter. So it seems like my theory might have been correct here, and we should be seeing a 16-inch MacBook Pro with a power requirement of 96 watts. Now, in case you're wondering, why do we need 96 watts, and what are those 9 extra watts being used for? Well, it's very likely for the display, which is not just going to be larger, but there's a very high chance that Apple will also brand this display as a Pro XDR display to match their high-end, actual Mac Pro, Pro XDR display, and then also the Super Retina XDR display naming that we got in the iPhones. So this display will very likely be brighter as well than the 500 nit display that we have currently in this generation of MacBook Pros. I'm just very disappointed that this new 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is supposed to be a new generation of MacBook Pros, it only seems to be a very slight tweak to the current generation, which we might have to stick to until, well, 4 years, for the next 4 years, which is an even bigger disappointment. There's no Face ID, by the way, on this, like we were supposed to be getting. There's no larger touch bar, there's no touchscreen, no flippable display, no OLED display, and nothing really that would make this truly next gen. But yeah, let me know in the comments what do you guys think about this, and yeah, don't forget about the AirPods Pro giveaway that we're still doing, and the Pixel 4 giveaway, which we're also still doing. Details for both of those in the description box down below. But yeah, thank you for watching, I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.